Here's an idea. Trigger warnings in college classrooms don't restrict speech, they create it.
Oh, for the love of Christ, idea guy, why? I mean, where do I even begin with this shit? Do you honestly believe this, Mike? Does anyone? The fact that your channel has grown since the last time I covered your dumb sophist ass says a lot about humanity, but I get the feeling that I'm going on a tangent. To the point of this video, one of the things that I learned while reading about totalitarianism, and I do own several books on the matter related more to the function based on actual regimes rather than just pointing about how spooky the Nazis were, but what can be understood about totalitarianism is the separation of cult of personality and cynical political expedience. An example of what I mean here would be the Defense Department falsifying statistics in order to cynically continue funding for a program that isn't working, or, and this is the difference, the Defense Department falsifying statistics as a means to convince others, and in many ways itself, that what it's doing is working. This is a known issue, by the way. The Pentagon has been hiding for decades the fact that it is run by a bunch of fucking Beltway lunatics. It could be because people want to keep the money flowing, or it could be like Alan Greenspan having to admit that he doesn't have the faintest fucking clue on how to run an economy. Having to confront the fact that you're an ignorant mental defective isn't easy. And that's where we begin, because this is the exact problem that I have with safe spaces as they're known. From the very first few seconds of your borderline retarded commentary, Mike, you fail to realize how easily either opportunists or dogmatists could abuse this insane, asinine, and fascist concept. Oh, Jesus. He even has the gall to start the video with a trigger warning. Fuck's sake, man.
There is a moral panic gripping the nation, and by extension, the internet. And while, like most moral panics, it does involve material which could imaginably offend some sensibilities, the moral panic isn't really about that material directly. The moral panic is about moral panic, specifically on college campuses. The panic panics thusly. College is a place where one is expected to confront all manner of unfamiliar, difficult, and in many cases unpleasant ideas.
The only way in which college forces people to confront ideas is going from a hyper-authoritarian high school to a hyper-liberal university. This isn't true for all universities, but let's be clear in that when it comes to soft sciences, they're not stocked with ardent individualists. So it's a particular brand of quote-unquote liberal that compose the gist of the faculty. I've been to 3 campuses in my area before actually managing to graduate, and all 3 were very left-leaning. But the bigger names on campus, the bigger professors, the activists, and nearly the totality of the student assembly, regardless of the campus, were dominated by staunch leftists. The problem here isn't empiricism or disagreeing with your economics professor on politics. The problem comes from the social sciences, anthropology, gender studies, philosophy, political science, and everything else that is more about concept than it is strict adherence to evidence.
What are both teachers and students to do if those ideas can be considered emotionally or psychologically harmful? Art which depicts rape or violence, literature which discusses racism or sexism, movies which show abuse, assault, or war. If students are either uncomfortable or literally unable due to anxiety to interact with certain subject matter, what's their course of action? What's the responsibility of the instructors teaching that material? To avoid it because it can cause upset? To teach it anyway and tell their students to just grin and bear it? Should they warn their students ahead of time that things could get grim?
Okay, just hang on a second here. Who the fuck is the tenured professor and who's the dumb fuck ignorant student? How does the student even know what is offensive? I spent over a decade of my life going to church on a weekly basis before even questioning my faith. So what the fuck are these little shits gonna possibly know about the material or even what they believe? I already know this video is gonna be 2 parts long, but fuck it, it's story time. While taking a philosophy course at a particular university, the professor of that class questioned if he wanted to teach Friedrich Nietzsche his material because he considered the author to be an anti-Semite. Now, if you've actually read Nietzsche, you'd know that he isn't an anti-Semite. However, his sister was, and cynically distorted his work as a means to associate the then dead philosopher to the Nazi Party. This is an unequivocal fact of history, that Elizabeth Nietzsche and her piece of shit husband were Nazis, but Friedrich Nietzsche clearly was not, considering he suffered a mental breakdown in 1889 and was dead by the following year. That didn't stop my professor from nearly refusing to teach the material, the writings of one of the greatest philosophers to ever grace our passionless and tedious fucking planet. That course was, in many ways, the catalyst for me to question my personal philosophy. Without that uninhibited education, I could be sitting here as some drooling collectivist telling you about your fucking pronouns rather than defending free thought. It's not a moral question, it's about accessibility of ideas. If someone wants to be a limp dick collectivist and professional victim, then by all means, be the best weakling bore that you can be. But at the very minimum, give those of us that don't want to be fucked in the ass by our girlfriend's strap-on the opportunity to discover better ideas. We are just a minute in to this video.
This last thing, warnings, trigger warnings specifically, have been a big topic of conversation and the source of said aforementioned moral panic. Moral panic. Trigger warnings, like the one at the beginning of this video, are bits of text letting people know the following discussion may include content that triggers their anxiety or PTSD.
Consider this just my opinion, but any person that points to post-traumatic stress disorder as a means to avoid specific media is a repugnant fucking jerk-off. We have veterans returning home from the Iraq and Afghan campaigns with serious mental health issues that are not being addressed. But does anyone give a shit? No. Oh man, the veteran suicide and addiction rate is out of control. Well, these aren't white women on Twitter, so who gives a shit? It's on us to stick some mandatory shirts in The Sims 4 and talk about sexual assault in your video game. But dealing with veterans needing access to a healthcare system that isn't the wet dream of Ayn Rand, well, that sounds complex. And we're too busy giving lip service to the, sexual assault that's actually happening in the military to do a fucking thing about it. The sad fact about the military is that what we need is gender parity, so that after enough white women are raped and fucking kill themselves, that perhaps a portion of this country will give a shit about veterans. Anyone walking around a college campus complaining about PTSD that isn't a veteran can fuck themselves.
Trigger warnings, the story goes, started on the internet in feminist spaces as a way to warn assault, abuse, rape, and other survivors that certain conversations in those spaces entail those topics. Because, hey, you need a place to talk about those things, right? Communities on the internet form around many things, shared traumatic experiences amongst them. And in case your peers don't want to be exposed to that stuff, why not spend some extra characters warning them up front? No big. The complaint is that trigger warnings have crossed some boundaries. They moved from private spaces to larger, more public spaces. First, to places on the internet like Tumblr. Trigger warnings in the tags of Tumblr posts, for instance, allow people to block content before it even reaches their eyeballs. And now, as the internet continues to leak into meat space, as it does, trigger warnings have found their way into college classrooms. Some teachers do willingly provide, and some students have requested warnings for difficult and potentially offensive material.
Holy shit, Mr. Matter-of-Factly, how do you know that they know it's offensive? How could they possibly know the curriculum before it's even fucking taught? This is such a fucking massive gap in the logic of this argument. How do the students know the curriculum is offensive if they haven't already learned it? I was an information sponge when I was that young. I was on a daily basis reading, whether it was wikis or encyclopedias or fucking books or novels or nonfiction or whatever. I had a fucking physical copy of the New York Times delivered to my house for like 2 years. Every fucking day I'd read it. And there wasn't a single moment in time where I wasn't in class learning something because I was a stupid, young, ignorant shit. So you're telling me that people that spend all fucking day on Reddit and Tumblr, these wastelands of pseudo-intellectual shit. You're gonna tell me that those fuckers know more than the professor teaching the material. It's a bald-faced fucking lie, and I'm not standing for it.
The worry about such warnings is that if students might respond to obliquely offensive educational content with moral panic, then teachers, feeling pressured to adjust or simply unable to teach certain material, lose their academic freedom. Plus, the worry continues, we exacerbate an already out-of-hand problem. The psychological oversensitivity of millennials, a population caricatured as so willingly offended they can barely walk through the produce section at the grocery store. So fragile, all of them.
You say that as if it isn't a bald-faced fucking fact. This authoritarian strain of the left is the cancer of my generation. To think what millennials could do if they weren't a bunch of pussies obsessed with identity politics and the dumbest mutation of Marxist theory. This could be about class, but it never will be, because these people already are bourgeois cunts that are too busy worrying about the racial tone of their fucking iPhone emoji than labor rights, or unionism, or the rich fucking this country into the ground, or management fucking the working class. Whatever happened to that kind of Marxism? Whatever happened to class struggle? What happened to leftist politics that isn't about your cunt?
Those against trigger warnings often say that college prepares one for the real world, whatever that is, and that there are no trigger warnings in the real world. By requesting them, you're admitting difficult stuff should be handled with kid gloves and encouraging intolerance of difficulty in others. This line of thinking often claims that exposure is the best cure for PTSD.
These students, outside of a portion of veterans, do not have post-traumatic stress disorder. Stop making that assertion, you fucking ignorant and callous cocksucker.
And besides, who are students or university administration, for that matter, to dictate what instructors should or shouldn't say? By requesting or providing trigger warnings, you're indicating that there is awful stuff that shouldn't be discussed and are therefore limiting the expression of others. Come on, they might say. There's awful stuff out there in the world and you can't protect yourself from it, so college is a great place to build up your tolerance.
Linking free thought to binge drinking and cavalier fraternity antics. You know, honestly, this is the point in the video where I am almost done. This is almost not worth covering, because if you listen to this and you find it persuasive, you're a fascist idiot. I mean, really, when you are this dismissive about free thought, simply having the ability to challenge convention and commonly held beliefs is the same as being some frat house douchebag.
You know, after playing the beta for Black Ops 3, bro, I started reading The Republic by Plato, and it made me think back to what the founders envisioned for the nation. I mean, when you consider what sort of republic we started with and the flaws that it had then, but compared to the absolute sophistry that is occurring now in places like California, with their fucking retarded attempt at a pure democracy, you have to think about what Plato wrote regarding the absurdity of the polis and how democracy really is, in a way, an impossible ideal. On top of that, when you actually look at how aristocracy as the ideal state became just the rule of the wealthy, it could have actually proven that regardless of the form that government actually takes, humans will inevitably ruin it. This could mean that civilization is a concept in society as we know it can never actually reach a 2,000-year-old ideal of actually resulting in both a functioning and representative government. But whatever, going out for a beer run, FIFA 16 draft challenge is going down live! Woo!
So as some of you will likely know, I am currently out of time. Be sure to check back for part 2 where I continue to cover Idea Guy Mike's video. Until then, I ask you guys to like the video, share it where appropriate, and be sure to leave a comment as I'm always looking for a general feel of my audience.